It was the 1980s, the decade of decadence. The Canadian Constitution was repatriated. New computer technologies emerged. Blockbuster movies and MTV began to reshape pop culture, and baseless conspiracy theories about cults committing mass child abuse spread around the country. Talk shows and news programs fanned fears, and hundreds of allegations were investigated by the authorities. Even as cases slowly collapsed and skepticism prevailed, defendants went to prison, families were traumatized, and millions of dollars were spent on prosecutions. The phenomenon was so sprawling that in its aftermath it took on several names, such as the ritual abuse scare or the daycare panic. However, one name has increasingly stuck: the Satanic Panic.
Aerobicize with Amber. Today I'm going to take you through a totally awesome workout.
That's what we are.
In fact, some new groups seem to be picking up that satanic smell of success and following along in its path.
The Lords of the New Church can be taken obviously a variety of ways in terms of the title and what it might imply and what their name is. First of all, I question how many of these bands truly have a satanic motive, you know. And I think that what goes on with anything is that once the issue is brought up, people tend to try to look for those things, and they'll try to place it, and they'll say, aha, I see that that's implying some sort of a religious or satanic overtone.
Casey said it was an idea they'd gotten from Altar of Sacrifice, a song by the heavy metal band Slayer.
I bruised the waiting dagger in hand, spilling the pure virgin blood. Satan's slaughter ceremonial death, answer his every command.
Paler's parents filed suit against the band, trying to hold them partially responsible for their daughter's murder, a suit that was eventually thrown out.
The greatest lie he's ever told was convincing people he doesn't exist. And you know, you see people, they think that he's like red. He's got a goatee and a pointy tail and stuff like that. He doesn't. He's very beautiful. He's an angel. Why would he look like some monster? He's capable of looking just like you. He could be in this room right now. We wouldn't know it.
That's a scary thought.
It's a very scary thought.
You know, there are thousands of men and women who are secretly worshiping the devil in this country. If you'd like to join that audience on Thursday when we discuss Satanism, call now to reserve your seat.
Tell me where it comes from, because it is kind of an eccentric way of life.
You know what it is? These people get these ideas, all right, we're going to do this great story on this, like, bizarre cult, right? And they go down to bars, and they eavesdrop in on conversations, and then they don't even print the whole truth. What they do is pick the most sensational, you know, stories, sex, drugs, orgies, you know, I mean, like, the whole article is supposed to be on the music scene, and he ends up writing about my sex life. Who cares about my sex life?
I do.
This eyeball was so big it blotted out the sun, okay?
These young people are playing Dungeons and Dragons. It's an enormously complicated game in which each player chooses an imaginary character he'll assume. There are dwarfs, knights and thieves, gods and devils, magic and spells. It's a journey into a land of fantasy through complicated mazes where you use your wits to kill your enemies before they kill you, all in a quest for wealth and power. The Dungeon Master orchestrates and referees the game, creating scenarios both complicated and terrifying.
I think that to say that because that child played Dungeons & Dragons, who's to say that that child does not watch television, does not participate in high school sports or what per se?
I have yet to see one bit of valid clinical evidence to show that this has been anything more than coincidental with a disturbed child.
If you found 12 kids in murder-suicide with one connecting factor in each of them, wouldn't you question it? And that's all people do.
I would certainly do it in a scientific manner, and this is as unscientific as you can get. It's nothing but a witch hunt.
In some of those, it was clearly the decisive element. In other ones, it was just a major element in the thinking of the people at the time they committed suicide or murder. It's not coincidence, not when you have careful documentation, you have careful notes, you have eyewitnesses. For instance, one case, the parents were actually saw their child summon Dungeons and Dragons demons into his room before he killed himself. Another case, the kid thought he had the ability to astral travel, coming from the Dungeons and Dragons game, that he could leave his body and come back. And he had rigged it up just according to the rule book so he could do it. He was surrounded by his materials and put a bullet in his head so he could leave his body, and he's never come back.
This is make-believe.
In what may become one of the biggest child molesting cases ever on record, 7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today on more than 100 counts of child molestation.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia McMartin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
The mother of the first complaining child was psychotic, but they just kept on going. It was like the Titanic. It was like a roller coaster or a ship that just was out of control and couldn't stop.
At some point, I came to the realization, this many people can't be doing this to this many victims for this long and not leaving any corroborative evidence behind. It just doesn't work that way.
The year was 1980, and in the wake of the women's rights movement, more women were choosing to have careers as the country was going through a recession. The religious right and conservatism were ascendant, and both emphasized the nuclear family. Daycare was becoming more of a necessity, and moms were feeling guilt with the constant battle of finding a work life and home life balance. Many felt guilt for relying on daycare due to this. A book was published that introduced readers to a cast of murderous Canadian Satanists. The book was published in 1980, and it was released and called Michelle Remembers. It was written by Canadian psychologist Lawrence Pastor and his former patient, who became his wife, not good, Michelle Smith. The book outlined her memories of child abuse at the hand of Satanists. The book became a bestseller despite skepticism of the validity of the events. After decades of denial, the public was just beginning to confront the problem of sexual abuse, especially that involving children. This was when mandatory reporting laws were implemented and a rise of child protection cases had authorities and social workers worried. All of this occurring at once in the 80s seemed to give the public the proper fuel for a moral panic. Once Michelle Remembers was published, a villain was created, that villain being the Satanist. Satanism is a group of ideological and philosophical beliefs based on Satan. Although several historical precedents exist, the contemporary religious practice of Satanism began with Anton LaVey in the USA in 1966. He founded the Church of Satan, and we're going to deep dive that in future. Before that, Satanism existed primarily as the subject of accusations by various Christian groups toward perceived ideological opponents, rather than a self-identity or an expressed religious belief. Satanism and the concept of Satan has also been used by artists and entertainers for symbolic expression. Led Zeppelin was involved in one of the more estranged allegations of satanic worship back in the 80s. Televangelist Paul Crouch claimed that by playing the group's track Stairway to Heaven backwards, a voice would be heard saying,
"Here's to my sweet Satan, he will give those with him 666.
The claim was purely a coincidence, albeit an unsettling one. A lot of heavy metal, rock and roll, and punk artists were being accused of practicing Satanism at the time, Black Sabbath being another well-known example.
The McMartin preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. The scene, it is alleged, of one of the biggest and most bizarre cases of sexual abuse of children in anyone's memory.
Fast forward to the summer of 1983 in Manhattan Beach, California, and the police had just sent a letter to about 200 families asking for help into an investigation. Judy Johnson, the mother of one of the youngest students at a small family-run school called McMartin Preschool, reported that her son had been sodomized by not only her estranged husband, but also by his teacher, Ray Buckley. The school was founded by Virginia McMartin. Ray was the son of the school administrator, Peggy McMartin Buckley. The mother claimed her son had painful bowel movements, which led to her believing the boy had been abused. No one is sure what happened next, as some sources claim the son denied the allegations, and other sources claim that he confirmed the allegations. The letter sent home to parents was leading and asked parents to question their children. It read, "Dear parent, this department is conducting a criminal investigation involving child molestation. 288 PC. Ray Buckley, an employee of Virginia McMartin's preschool, was arrested September 7, 1983 by this department. The following procedure is obviously an unpleasant one, but to protect the rights of your children as well as the rights of the accused, this inquiry is necessary for a complete investigation. Records indicate that your child has been or is currently a student at the preschool. We are asking your assistance in this continuing investigation. Please question your child to see if he or she has been a witness to any crime or if he or she has been a victim. Our investigation indicates that possible criminal acts include oral fondling of genitalia or chest area and sodomy, possibly committed under the pretense of taking the child's temperature. Also, photos may have been taken of children without their clothing. Any information from your child regarding having ever observed Ray Buckley to leave a classroom alone with a child during any nap period, or if they have ever observed Ray Buckley tie up a child, is important. Please complete the enclosed information form and return it to this department in the enclosed stamped return envelope as soon as possible. We will contact you if circumstances dictate same. We ask you to please keep this investigation strictly confidential because of the nature of the charges and the highly emotional effect it could have on our community. Please do not discuss this investigation with anyone outside your immediate family. Do not contact or discuss the investigation with Raymond Bucky, any member of the accused defendant's family, or employees connected with the McMartin preschool. There is no evidence to indicate that the management of Virginia McMartin's preschool had any knowledge of this situation, and no detrimental information concerning the operation of the school has been discovered during this investigation. Also, no other employee in the school is under investigation for any criminal act. The authorities also asked therapists to help interview hundreds of children. Children were questioned for hours on end. The questions were leading and suggestive, and all professionals involved were ill-equipped to deal with the type of allegations.
In what may become one of the biggest child molesting cases ever on record, 7 nursery school teachers were arraigned today on more than 100 counts of child molestation.
The accused include the preschool owner, 76-year-old Virginia McMartin, her daughter, and 2 grandchildren.
The authorities tried to make sense of the allegations. FBI agents, police officers, lawyers, and social workers gathered what they could and shared their findings at conferences and seminars. They handed out satanic calendars, traded pamphlets about symbols like the cross of Nero and the horned hand, and copied lists of supposed occult organizations, which included a collective of feminist astrologers in Minnesota. A lot of this stuff was being disseminated by law enforcement without efforts to corroborate it. Several hundred children were then interviewed by the Children's Institute International, CII, a Los Angeles-based abuse therapy clinic which was run by Key McFarlane. Later research demonstrated that since the methods of questioning used on the children were extremely suggestive, it led to false accusations. Others believe that the questioning itself may have led to false memory syndrome among the children questioned. Only 41 of the original 360 children ultimately testified in the grand jury and pre-trial hearings, and fewer than a dozen testified at the actual trials. Some of the accusations were described as bizarre, overlapping with accusations that mirrored the emerging satanic ritual abuse panic that was starting up at that time. It was alleged that, in addition to having been sexually abused, they saw witches fly, traveled in a hot air balloon, and were taken through underground tunnels. When shown a series of photographs by Danny Davis, the McMartin's lawyer, one child identified actor Chuck Norris as one of the abusers. Some of the abuse was alleged to have occurred in secret tunnels beneath the school. Several excavations turned up evidence of old buildings on the site and other debris from before the school was built, but no evidence of any secret chambers or tunnels was found. There were even claims of orgies at car washes and airports, and of children being flushed down toilets to secret rooms where they would be abused, then cleaned up and presented back to their parents. Some child interviewees talked of a game called Naked Movie Star and suggested they were forcibly photographed nude. During trial testimony, some children stated that the Naked Movie Star game was actually a rhyming taunt used to tease other children. What you say is what you are, you're a naked movie star. And actually had nothing to do with having naked pictures taken or even with any abuse. Besides children abusing other children verbally, that is. On March 22nd of 1984, Virginia McMartin, Peggy McMartin Buckley, Ray's sister Peggy Ann Buckley, and teachers Mary Ann Jackson, Betty Rader, and Babette Spittler were charged with 115 counts of child abuse, which was later expanded to 321 counts of child abuse, which involved 48 children. Judy Johnson, who made the initial allegations, made bizarre and impossible statements about Raymond, including that he could fly. Though the prosecution asserted Johnson's mental illness was caused by the events of the trial, Johnson had admitted to them that she was mentally ill beforehand. Evidence of Johnson's mental illness was withheld from the defense for 3 years, and when it was finally provided, it was in the form of sanitized reports that excluded Johnson's statements at the order of the prosecution. One of the original prosecutors, Glenn Stevens, left the case in protest and stated that other prosecutors had withheld evidence from the defense, including the information that Johnson's son did not actually identify Raymond in a series of photographs. Stevens also accused Robert Filibazian, the deputy district attorney on the case, of lying and withholding evidence from the court and defense lawyers in order to keep the McMartin and Buckys in jail and prevent access to exonerating evidence. 2 trials were conducted for the McMartin preschool case. The first lasted from July 13th of 1987 until January 18th of 1990. And the second trial lasted from May 7th of 1990 to July 27th of 1990. On January 18th of 1990, after 3 years of testimony and 9 weeks of deliberation by the jury, Peggy McMartin Buckley was acquitted on all counts. Ray Buckley was cleared on 52 of 65 counts and freed on bail after more than 5 years in jail. 9 of 11 jurors at a press conference following the trial stated that they believed the children had been molested, but the evidence did not allow them to state who had committed the abuse beyond a reasonable doubt. 11 out of the 13 jurors who remained by the end of the trial voted to acquit Buckley of the charges. The refusal of the remaining 2 to vote for a not guilty verdict resulted in the deadlock. Ray Buckley was retired later on 6 of the 13 counts of which he was not acquitted in the first trial. The second trial opened on May 7th of 1990 and resulted in another hung jury on the 27th of July of the same year. The prosecution then gave up trying to obtain a conviction, and the case was closed, with all charges against Ray Buckley dismissed. At that time, he had been jailed for 5 years without ever being convicted of committing any crime. The case lasted 7 long years and cost $15 million. It is the longest and most expensive criminal case in the history of the U.S. legal system and ultimately resulted in no convictions. The McMartin preschool was closed and the building was dismantled. In 2005, one of the children, who's now an adult, retracted the allegations of abuse. In 1990, parents who believed their children had been abused at the preschool hired archaeologist E. Gary Stickle to investigate the site. In May of 1990, Stickle claimed he found evidence of tunnels consistent with the children's accounts under the McMartin preschool using ground-penetrating radar. Others have disagreed with Stickle's conclusions. W. Joseph Wyatt's 2002 report concluded that the so-called tunnels under the preschool were more plausibly explained as a series of adjacent rubbish pits that were used by the owners of the site before the preschool's construction back in 1966. Shortly after investigation into the McMartin charges began, the funds to research child sexual abuse greatly increased, notably through the budget allocated for the National Center on Children Abuse and Neglect, NCCAN. The agency's budget increased from $1.8 million to a whopping $7.2 million between the years 1983 and 1984. It then increased to a whopping $15 million in 1985, making it the greatest source of funding for child abuse and neglect prevention in the United States. The majority of this budget went towards studies on sexual abuse, with only $5 million of all of that going towards physical abuse and neglect. Some have speculated that the McMartin case was planned by the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect to up the budget. That conspiracy theory is even too whack for me to follow, though. Nearly 200 people were charged with crimes over the course of the Satanic Panic, and dozens were convicted. Many defendants were eventually freed, sometimes after years. 3 Arkansas teenagers, who became known as the West Memphis Three, were freed in the year 2011, almost 20 years after they were convicted of murders that prosecutors portrayed as a satanic sacrifice. In 2013, a Texas couple were released after spending 21 years in prison, and then they were later awarded $3.4 million from a state fund for wrongful convictions. 2 years later, researchers with the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect found that investigators could not substantiate any of the roughly 12,000 accusations of group cult sexual abuse based on satanic ritual. In a few instances, apologies followed, including from Mr. Rivera and Kyle Zerpolo, one of the former McMartin students who made allegations to the police. "I lied," he told the Los Angeles Times. "It was an ordeal. I remember thinking to myself, I'm not going to get out of here unless I tell them what they want to hear."
After his acquittal, Raymond Buckey made a few television appearances, like this one on The Larry King Show.
What do you want to do in your life? I want to be left alone. I've seen what the news media can do to people in a crowded situation, and I don't want to be in LA, and I want to be left alone. Simple life.
For Raymond Buckey's defense attorney, Danny Davis, the impact of the McMartin case should never be forgotten.
It brings into focus that our American culture can do harm to our children in the next generation, to win at all costs, to have a great publicity run, to jump the ratings and make it for a day. Those are all adult aspirations at the sacrifice of children.
The earliest of the wave of satanic ritual abuse cases began in Kern County, California, also in 1980. In Bakersfield, social workers who had read Michelle Remembers learned of a local occult sex ring from 2 children who had been coerced into fabricating the claims by relatives. Between 1984 and 1986, the investigation into these claims would send at least 26 people to jail in interrelated convictions, despite a complete lack of corroborative physical evidence for any of the claims. Nearly all of those convictions have since been overturned, including that of one man who served 20 years of a 40-year sentence, and those of 2 parents who were sentenced to 240 years in prison after their own sons were coached to accuse them of abuse. This template, a spiraling investigation, wild claims, no evidence, would remain consistent for more than a decade throughout the subsequent wave of failed prosecutions of satanic ritual abuse in daycares and schools across the U.S.
The apparent practice of Satanism, that's worship of the devil. Now, police have been skeptical when investigating these acts, just as we are in reporting them. But there is no question that something is going on out there, and that's sufficient reason for 2020 to look into it. One caution, we believe that some of the pictures and descriptions in Tom Jarrell's report may be disturbing and even frightening, particularly to younger viewers. Here is Tom's report.
May 1985, the news program 2020 ran a segment on Satan worship that described animal mutilations clearly used in some kind of bizarre ritual, rock music associated with devil worship, satanic graffiti, and backward messages in pop songs. There were a few caveats. The host, Hugh Downs, opened by saying, "Police have been skeptical when investigating these acts, just as we are in reporting them. But there is no question that something is going on out there, and there's sufficient reason for 2020 to look into it." The program presented cult activity, if not the occult itself, in all but certain terms. Today we have found Satan is alive and thriving, or at least plenty of people believe he is, said the correspondent Tom Jarrell. His followers are extremely secretive, but found in all walks of life. Only near the end of the report did he say that, until evidence was proven, the link between crime and satanic cults will remain speculative. 3 years later, in 1988, NBC commissioned its own special. This one was hosted by Gerardo Rivera, who described gruesome crimes, aired child testimony of abuse, and interviewed Ozzy Osbourne. About 20 million homes tuned in to that broadcast. In April of 1985, thousands of curious, angry, and confused customers were calling the corporate giant Procter & Gamble about leaflets that accused it of using its profits from household goods to support devil worship. They simply are not true, W. Wallace Abbott, a senior vice president, said at a news conference. We haven't the vaguest idea how it started. All we know is people are believing it. Do you know how hard it is to fight a rumor? False rumors had started years earlier, many claiming that its logo of a bearded man in the moon facing 13 stars was actually a symbol of the devil, Satan himself. The logo dated back to 1882, and the stars referred to the 13 original colonies. Not anything to do with Satan. I don't think, anyway. The company began a 2-decade campaign to defend its name, sending representatives to churches, filing lawsuits, and pursuing court cases as recently as 2007. It also ended up eventually changing its logo. In 1992, the Justice Department thoroughly debunked the myth of the satanic ritual abuse cult. But though accusations of satanically motivated child abuse rituals had pretty much died out by the mid-1990s, law enforcement continued to treat Satan as a potential criminal indicator, as we see here in this 1994 police training video entitled The Law Enforcement Guide to Satanic Cults.
Here you go. This is what I'm talking about. Okay, what you're looking at here is called Voodoo Vivi. This is kind of like a coat of arms, if you will, for the demonic. These aren't witches. These are definitely Satanists. You look at these dumpsters. See, this is how they talk to each other. Now, what you see here, this is gang graffiti, okay? And this is how gangs talk to each other, okay? But now this is how occultists talk to each other. This here is a psilocybin mushroom. So probably they had a psilocybin ritual, which is not uncommon. Occultists are known for using peyote and psilocybin. 9 represents the 9 satanic statements. You can find this in a book by Anton Sanzer LaVey, which is called the Satanic Bible, and you will see that there are 9 satanic statements. This is the way occultists tell each other, hey, we're Satanists and we're partying.
The 80s saw the spread of AIDS misinformation, kidnapped victims' faces appearing on milk cartons, the mass panic surrounding the 1982 Tylenol murders, trick-or-treat scares. The nation's lone Halloween candy killer, Ronald Clark O'Brien, received a highly publicized execution in 1984, and the 80s saw the first wave of reports of scary killer clowns attempting to prey on children. Each of these moments of social unrest signaled Americans' growing alarm over stranger danger and the fear that evil could always be lurking right around the corner. Through it all, Christian fundamentalism and a literal belief in angels and devils were on the rise. Fundamentalist preachers like Jerry Falwell and his Moral Majority, founded in 1979, gained prominence across the country, passing along a literal fire and brimstone style of Christianity. Anti-occult crusaders like Pat Pulling, who believed her son's death by suicide was the result of a Dungeons and Dragons curse, crusaded against role-playing games as dangerous and demonic, backed by occult fear-mongering from Chicken is Chick tracks. The evangelical movement wasn't alone in its growing occult obsession and fear-mongering. The media, too, played an outside role in stalking the public's fear and fueling misconceptions surrounding occult practices. In 1988, Geraldo Rivera's lurid documentary, Devil Worship: Exposing Satan's Underground, became the highest-rated televised documentary to air up to that point. The 1991 2020 episode famously, and for many viewers terrifyingly, aired an official Roman Catholic exorcism. Evangelical documentaries like Hell's Bells attempted to tie rock music to the occult, while Christian fantasy, like that of best-selling author Frank Peretti, transformed real-world social issues into matters of angelic and demonic warfare. With so much parallel emphasis on fearing strangers in your neighborhood and Satan in your home, a collision of the two was practically inevitable. Though this may all seem like a thing of the past, similar paranoia and fears are still rampant today. A woman in Texas said that Hocus Pocus 2 could bring evil into people's homes. According to Variety, she said, "A worst-case scenario is you unleash hell on your kids and in your home. The whole movie is based on witches harvesting children for blood sacrifices." Another recent example is QAnon. According to NPR, people believe that a shadowy cabal kidnaps children, tortures them, and uses their blood in satanic rituals. Many people involved in the conspiracy believe that powerful politicians are responsible this time, not the preschool teachers or daycare workers of the 80s and the 90s. Even musician Lil Nas X has sparked Satanic Panic type rumors with his music video for Montero, Call Me By Your Name, according to ABC News. The panic that arises when people are confronted by beliefs that challenge their own is not going anywhere. And so it seems that the harmful type of accusations that fueled the Satanic Panic may continue as well.